This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website.
If you mention a Medal of Honor recipient during the American Civil War, very quickly you tend to hear the caveat that the Medal of Honor didn't mean so much during the U.S. Civil War, and there are certainly some examples of that. But that doesn't mean that there weren't extraordinary acts of bravery in the face of the enemy above and beyond the call of duty during the Civil War. Acts that deserve to be remembered. Face it, online commerce is no longer the future, it's the present, and you need a great website if you don't want your business to become history. Thank you to the good people at Squarespace for sponsoring this episode of The History Guy. So many of us need a good website, whether that's to sell a product or to manage your bookings or maybe to take in charitable donations or maybe even sell an online course. But if you want to pay someone else to build it for you, well, it just costs way too much.
Squarespace is the all in one website platform to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or you're managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place and all on your terms. So, how do you make the best website without spending thousands on a designer? Well, Squarespace makes it easy, leveraging 2 decades of experience in powerful AI tools that let you unlock your strongest creative potential. And then Squarespace helps you, whatever your business. Squarespace Payments lets you get started receiving payments in just a few clicks. Acuity Scheduling helps you manage client meetings and bookings. If you want to raise money for a cause, Squarespace makes setup a breeze, making accepting donations and managing donors easy. You can set up giving pages and start accepting donations online right away. Squarespace will help you build the website that you need for online stores, print on demand, blogs, email campaigns, appointment scheduling, gated member areas, and even more.
Don't let your business become history. You need a website that deserves to be remembered. So go to squarespace.com and get started with your own free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thehistoryguy and use the code thehistoryguy to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Robert P. Broadwater explains in his 2007 book, Civil War Medal of Honor Recipients, that the medal was proposed by Lieutenant Colonel Edward Townsend, Adjutant General of the United States Army, following the various reverses that had befallen Union arms in the opening campaigns of the Civil War. The war had started poorly for the Union, beginning with the Union's defeat at the first major battle of the war, which the Union called the First Battle of Bull Run. Other defeats occurred at places like Ball's Bluff in Virginia and Wilson's Creek in Missouri. Maine Congressman James G. Blaine would later comment about the opening months of the war. The situation was startling and serious, and for the first time, people began to realize that we're to have a war with bloody fighting and much suffering. In the midst of this difficult period, it's no surprise that Townsend sought to establish an award that would inspire Northern soldiers and recognize their heroic actions. Moreover, Broadwater notes, the influx of foreign born officers who had come to America in search of commissions in the Union Army caused Townsend to reevaluate the existing medal policy. Foreign officers with all their shiny medals were the envy of American soldiers, and the Adjutant General wanted to create an American award for bravery. The idea was first embraced by Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, and Congress passed and Lincoln signed a bill to create a Medal of Honor for the Navy on December 21st, 1861. The conditions for the award were, however, rather vague. To be bestowed upon such petty officers, seamen, landsmen, and marines as shall most distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action and other seaman-like qualities during the present war. There was no need to hurry. It would be another year before the Union Navy awarded a medal. Perhaps the creation of the Navy Award prodded, as Broadwater put it, the War Department into action. A bill for an Army medal was signed into law on July 12, 1862. The description was based on the Navy Award. To such non-commissioned officers and privates as shall most distinguish themselves by their gallantry in action and other soldier-like qualities during the present insurrection. Again, there was no hurry. While Congress had authorized awards, they hadn't authorized any budget to actually make the medals. The money was not appropriated until March of 1863, although the medals could be given for previous actions. This led to an odd occurrence. While the medals were first authorized for the present insurrection, in the authorization in March of 1863, Congress made the award permanent and also altered the Army Award to make officers eligible. This allowed the award to be given to actions by an officer prior to the war, against the original intent of the medal. The first Medal of Honor by date of action was awarded for actions on the frontier in February of 1861 before the Civil War started, to Assistant Army Surgeon Bernard Irwin, the subject of another episode of The History Guy. Still, the criteria was fuzzy. The Library of Congress notes the Navy instituted an application process for the Medal of Honor in July 1862 and made the recommendation of a commanding officer mandatory. The Army's requirements for nominating a soldier for the medal were open to greater interpretation. This ambiguity led to the award being bestowed on individuals not regularly enrolled in the military or for actions not in line with the above and beyond the call of duty spirit of the Medal of Honor. This was particularly notable in some cases, as evidenced by the fact that some 900 of the Medals of Honor that were awarded during the Civil War were later revoked by a commission for not meeting the criteria. The example of the 864 Medals of Honor given en masse to the 27th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment in 1863 is instructive. At the height of the Battle of Gettysburg, the enlistment for the short-term regiment expired. The president authorized medals for members of the regiment who volunteered to stay behind and guard Washington so that troops could be deployed to the battle. Military.com writes that some 309 volunteered, while the rest went home to Maine. Those who stayed ended up staying in D.C. for 4 days. When the Gettysburg campaign ended, the capital returned to its previous strength, and the Maine troops returned home. When it came time to award the unit's Medals of Honor, a clerical error lost the names of the men who actually volunteered. So the War Department gave the medal to the entire regiment, even though the majority had not actually volunteered, and none of them had actually fought. The medal was also given to 25 men and 4 officers who served as funeral guards after Lincoln's assassination. All of those awards were later struck as not having met the criteria. But those might not have been the worst example. One had been given to Asa Bird Gardner, who had served as a captain in the 22nd New York State Militia. He'd received the award for conspicuous bravery and distinguished conduct during the Gettysburg campaign, particularly in the action of Sporting Hill and the defense of Carlisle. It's not clear what exactly his meritorious action was in the small skirmish, and his medal was rescinded later for lack of documentation. The commission found that his award had been given because of a letter he wrote to the Secretary of War stating, "I understand there are a number of bronze medals for distribution to soldiers of the late war, and I request I be allowed one as a souvenir of memorable times past." Actions could be difficult to document. The Library of Congress notes soldiers could nominate themselves or others long after the Civil War ended, and for actions difficult to document with the passage of time. The library gives the example of Charles Wellington Reed. Reed acquired some fame as an artist, having done some 200 sketches during the war, many of which were later published. He received the Medal of Honor for actions at Gettysburg on July 2, 1863, as a bugler in the 9th Independent Battery of the Massachusetts Light Artillery. His medal citation reads only, "Reed rescued his wounded captain from between the lines." The citation doesn't make his action clear. The captain, John Bigelow, had been wounded between the lines and under constant fire. Reed led his horse and another horse out, under fire, and rescued Reed. Numerous Medals of Honor have since been awarded for rescuing a comrade under fire, although of course it depends upon the circumstance and might receive a lesser award today. Reed's award is for an action that would be recognized on the modern battlefield. Moreover, his action was documented. Bigelow himself recommended him for the award, which was corroborated by eyewitness accounts and approved by the Secretary of War. What was strange is that the recommendation and the approval didn't come until 1895, 32 years after the event. It was a different time with different tactics, leading to a type of action that would be less relevant today. The Department of Veteran Affairs writes, "The Civil War was an era of new and changing military technology and slowly evolving military tactics. And as a result, some of the Medals of Honor citations vary from modern presentations. For instance, medals were awarded for flag capture. In the Civil War, regimental flags still played a major role in guidance and troop movement during the heated din of battle. Loss of a flag meant troop confusion, disarray, and could lead to disaster. As such, the regimental colors had great military significance. Additionally, colors often were paid for by the communities from which the regiment came, and therefore the flags were a symbol of pride and sentimentality for the soldiers. It's difficult to compare actions such as capturing an enemy standard to the modern battlefield, but as standards were important to morale, capturing or holding a standard could have an outsized effect on the battle, and often required bravery above and beyond the call of duty to preserve your own standard or take one from the enemy. For example, William Harvey Kearny of the 54th Massachusetts participated in that regiment's disastrous charge on Fort Wagner outside of Charleston on July 18, 1893, which was depicted in the 1989 film Glory. It was a particularly deadly action. Out of 600 men in the regiment, 270 were killed, wounded, or captured, a roughly 42% casualty rate. Harriet Tubman witnessed the battle and wrote, "And then we saw the lightning, and that was the guns. And then we heard the thunder, and that was the big guns. And then we heard the rain falling, and that was the drops of blood falling. And when we came to get in the crops, it was the dead. that we reaped. Kearny preserved the regiment's colors. According to his Medal of Honor citation, when the color sergeant was shot down, this soldier grasped the flag, led the way to the parapet, and planted the colors thereon. When the troops fell back, he brought off the flag, under a fierce fire in which he was twice severely wounded. A more thorough description was printed in the United States Service Magazine in 1864. As our forces retire, Sergeant Kearny, who has kept the colors of his regiment flying upon the parapet of Wagner during the entire conflict, is seen creeping along on one knee, still holding up the flag, and only yielding its sacred trust upon finding an officer of his regiment. As he enters the field hospital, where his wounded comrades are being brought in, they cheer him in the colors. Though nearly exhausted with the loss of blood, he says, "Boys, the old flag never touched the ground." Kearny had to wait nearly 37 years before he received the award in 1901, but by date of action, he was the first black soldier to be awarded the medal. Another Massachusetts soldier, John Gregory Bishop Adams, also received the medal for saving a standard. In fact, two of them, at the December 1862 Battle of Fredericksburg. His citation reads, "Seized the two colors from the hands of a corporal and a lieutenant as they fell mortally wounded, and with a color in each hand advanced across the field to a point where the regiment was reformed on those colors." Adams had enlisted as a private, reached the rank of corporal before being promoted to second lieutenant for conspicuous bravery during the Peninsula Campaign in the spring of 1862. He wrote, "It was impossible to obtain officers' uniforms, so I bought a pair of brass shoulder straps, sewed them on my well-worn blouse, borrowed a sword of Lieutenant Mumford, and went on duty, as verdant an officer as could be found in the Army of the Potomac." He gave this harrowing account of the attack at Fredericksburg in an 1899 memoir. "It was necessary to move up an embankment and then charge over an open field. A rebel battery on our right had a raking fire on us, but we must go forward. Led by our gallant Captain Weymouth, we moved up the bank. The two color bearers, Sergeant Creasy and Sergeant Rappel, were the first to fall, but the colors did not touch the ground before they were up and going forward. Down went the color bearers again. Lieutenant Newcomb grasped one, a color corporal another. Newcomb fell, shot through both legs, and as he went down he handed the color to me. Next fell the color corporal, and the flag he held was grasped by Sergeant Merrill, who was soon wounded. Another seized the color, but he was shot immediately, and as it fell from his hands, the officer who already had one caught it." It certainly seems, arguably, bravery above and beyond the call of duty to take the colors after 3 pairs of men had been killed carrying them. But like many who have been cited for heroism, he didn't necessarily think so. I do not mention this fact to show that I was braver than other men, for every man of the old regiment on the field would have done the same had the opportunity offered. Documentation was particularly thin for William J. Johnson, a drummer for the 3rd Vermont Regiment. There's no official citation by the War Department for why he was awarded the medal, but the award was recorded in a Vermont newspaper. Willie Johnson has received a medal for his heroic conduct in the 7 days' fight before Richmond. On the retreat, when strong men threw away their guns, knapsacks, and blankets that they might have less weight to carry, this little fellow kept his drum and brought it safely to Harrison's Landing, where he had the honor of drumming for division parade, he being the only drummer who brought his drum from the field. Is keeping your drum an act to deserve the Medal of Honor? Perhaps that argument is made stronger by the fact that Johnson was just 13 years old, to date the youngest recipient of the Medal of Honor. He was not the only child soldier to show his bravery. The citation for 15-year-old John Cook reads, "On September 17, 1862, at Antietam, Maryland bugler Cook, only 15 years old, volunteered to act as a cannoneer, bravely serving the gun under severe enemy fire." The U.S. Department of Defense explains that as Cook was returning from delivering a message from the battery commander, he noticed that the attack had killed most of his unit's cannoneers. Without thinking twice, the young man began loading cannons by himself. Then events took another turn. The Department of Defense writes, "General John Gibbon, who happened to be riding by, saw him doing the work alone. Gibbon, still dressed in a general's uniform, hopped off his horse and began to help. While the Confederates came dangerously close to completely taking over, Gibbon and Cook were able to successfully man the cannons and push the enemy back. It must have been quite a sight, the bugler and the general manning the guns."
1,523 medals were awarded for service during the U.S. Civil War, more than in any other conflict. The rules are certainly stricter today, and today we have an awards system. We added the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross during the First World War and the Bronze Star during the Second World War, and many of the 1,522 men and one woman who received the award during the U.S. Civil War would have received other awards. But that doesn't mean that they didn't meet the standards of their time. It doesn't mean that they weren't heroes. It doesn't mean that their medals were less honorable. all 1,523, deserve to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.